and welcome to Crowvane Manor. Wherever you are, and whatever kind of night it's been, you've come to the right place to slow down. Let the world go quiet for a while. Out here, none of it needs your attention. Many of you return to these rooms night after night, and I'm grateful for that. There's a reason you keep coming back. The stories kept inside these walls aren't quite like the ones you'll hear anywhere else. Before we begin, leave a comment and tell me where in the world you're listening from tonight. I always enjoy reading them. And if these stories stay with you, a like and a subscribe help more than you know. Now get comfortable, breathe slow, and let's open the door together. Me and my friend were walking down a country road at around 10 o'clock at night when something happened that neither of us has ever been able to explain properly. It was one of those roads that feels different after dark. During the day, it was probably nothing special. Just a narrow country lane with trees on both sides, a few old fences, uneven ground, and the kind of quiet you expect outside of town. But at night, it became almost completely black. There were no streetlights. There were no houses close enough to throw light across the road. There were no cars passing every few minutes. The trees formed a thick canopy above us, their branches meeting over the road like a roof. Even though there was moonlight somewhere above the clouds and trees, almost none of it reached the ground. The road ahead of us looked like a dark tunnel. My friend had brought a speaker with him. He was playing music as we walked, probably because neither of us liked how quiet the road was without it. The music was not blasting, but it was loud enough that it filled the space around us. It made the walk feel less creepy. When you are walking through a dark place with someone else and music is playing, you can pretend the darkness is not really there. You can pretend you are just on your way home. You can pretend there is nothing in the trees. We had been walking for a while, talking occasionally over the music. The road stretched ahead of us in a straight line before disappearing into thicker darkness. I remember being able to see only a short distance in front of us. Beyond that, everything blended together. The road, the grass, the trees, the ditches on either side. All of it was just black. Then I saw something standing in the middle of the road. At first, I thought it was a fox. That was the only thing I could compare it to. It was small enough to be a fox, and the shape looked fox-like. It was standing directly in the center of the road, maybe far enough ahead that I could not make out every detail, but close enough that I could clearly see its outline. The strange part was that it was completely still, not alert, still. Not like an animal that hears something and freezes for a second before running away. It was statue still. It did not shift its weight. It did not lower its head. It did not turn toward us. It did not move its tail. It did not react to the music. It was just standing there in the middle of the road as if someone had placed it there. I slowed down. My friend kept walking for another step or two before noticing that I had stopped. I did not say anything right away. I stared at the animal, trying to understand what I was looking at. It had the outline of a fox, but something about the way it stood made my stomach tighten. A normal fox would have heard us coming. Even with the music playing, it would have smelled us, noticed movement, or reacted to our footsteps. But it stayed exactly where it was. I remember thinking that it looked almost posed, like a taxidermy animal, like a statue. The road was dark enough that I could not see its face clearly. I could only see the outline of its body and the shape of its head. It seemed to be facing slightly toward us, but I could not tell whether it was actually looking at us. The music kept playing. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then I heard something ahead, a rustling sound. It came from somewhere near the road, farther beyond the fox. It was not loud. It was subtle, like leaves or grass shifting. But on that road, with the music filling the silence, the fact that I noticed it at all made it stand out. I looked past the fox. That was when I saw the light. There was a bench farther ahead along the side of the road. I had not noticed it at first because it blended into the darkness. It was one of those old benches that probably looked completely ordinary in daylight, but strange at night, because it sat alone near the trees. On or near the bench, there was a single tiny white light. It was not bright enough to illuminate the area around it. It was just one small point of light in the darkness. At first, I thought it might be a phone torch, but it was too small. A phone flashlight would have spread light around it. Even if someone was holding a phone low, there should have been a wider glow. This was too concentrated, too small. It looked more like a tiny white point sitting in the dark. Then, I thought maybe it was a cigarette, but it was too white. A cigarette ember would have been orange or red. It would have flickered. This was pale white, almost cold-looking, and it did not move. It just sat there, a small white light near a bench, a fox standing perfectly still in the middle of the road, a rustling sound somewhere ahead. I felt something shift in my chest. I told my friend I had heard something. At first, he probably assumed it was an animal. That would have been the sensible thing to assume. We were on a country road surrounded by trees. There could have been foxes, badgers, deer, birds, or anything else moving through the brush. But when I pointed ahead, he saw the fox too. He stopped the music. The moment the speaker went quiet, the entire road changed. Until then, the music had covered everything. It had made the walk feel normal. It had given us something familiar to focus on. But once it stopped, we could hear the country road properly. The wind moving in the branches, a faint rustle in the grass, our own breathing, the soft sound of our shoes against the road, and somewhere farther ahead, a silence that felt heavier than it should have. The fox still had not moved. My friend and I stood there looking at it. I remember whispering because even though there was no reason to whisper, neither of us wanted to speak loudly. It felt wrong to make noise. It felt like whatever was ahead had already noticed us, and shouting would only make it worse. We started walking backward slowly. Neither of us turned around. We kept our eyes on the fox. At first, it stayed frozen in place. Then, as we moved backward, it moved too. Not fast, not suddenly. It took a slow step toward us. That was when the fear really started. A fox should have run away from us. It should have slipped into the trees. It should have darted across the road and disappeared into the grass. Instead, it slowly walked toward us. The way it moved made it feel less like an animal and more like something that was copying one. Its movements were careful and quiet. It did not lower its head to sniff. It did not act curious in the normal way animals do. It just kept walking forward. My friend and I backed up faster. The fox kept coming. The tiny white light by the bench was still there. The rustling had stopped. We could not see anyone near the bench. We could not see a person holding a phone. We could not see a cigarette. We could not see anything at all except that single pale light. Then the fox started running. It was not a full sprint at first. It ran toward us in a quick, low movement, and that was enough. We turned and ran. There was no conversation, no decision. No one said, "Run." The moment the fox moved faster, both of us panicked and sprinted back up the road as hard as we could. I remember the sound of our shoes hitting the ground. I remember the speaker banging against my friend as he ran. I remember branches scraping together somewhere above us. I remember being terrified that I would hear paws behind us. The road seemed longer on the way back. Everything was dark. We could barely see where we were going. The trees pressed in around the road, and every shadow looked like something moving. I kept expecting to trip. I kept expecting something to come out of the ditch or the woods beside us. We did not stop until we reached the end of the road. There was more light there. Not a lot, but enough that it felt safer. Maybe there were houses farther away, maybe a streetlight near the junction, maybe just a clearer opening in the trees. Whatever it was, it felt like we had made it back to somewhere normal. We both stood there trying to catch our breath. For a few seconds, neither of us said anything. We were both looking back down the dark road. The road stretched away from us under the trees, disappearing into blackness. From where we stood, we could not see the bench. We could not see the little white light. We could not see the fox. We just stared. I remember thinking that we should leave. We should go home. We should get away from the road entirely. But instead, we stood there for about a minute, watching the darkness. Maybe we were trying to prove to ourselves that nothing had followed us. Maybe we expected the fox to run out onto the road again. Maybe we wanted to see whether the light had moved. I do not know why we stayed. But we did. For almost a full minute, there was nothing. No sound, no movement, no fox. The road looked empty. Then something emerged from the darkness. At first, I saw the fox. It came slowly out of the black part of the road, walking toward us. Not running, not chasing, just walking. The same way it had before. It moved into the faint light at the edge of the road, and for a second I could see its shape more clearly. It still looked like a fox. Small, low to the ground, moving quietly. But it did not seem like it was alone. A figure appeared behind it. At first I thought it was a tree or a shadow. Then it moved. It was an old man. He was walking slowly down the road behind the fox. He had a flat cap on. He was limping, and his face was very white. Not pale in a normal way. Not like someone caught in the headlights. His face looked unnaturally white against the darkness. It was the first thing I noticed once I realized it was a person. The cap sat low on his head, and beneath it, his face seemed almost colorless. The fox walked ahead of him. The man came behind it. They moved together down the road toward us. My friend and I were frozen. I remember trying to understand what I was seeing. Maybe he was just an old man walking his dog. That was the most obvious answer. Maybe the fox was not really a fox, but a small dog. Maybe the old man had been sitting on the bench. Maybe the white light had been something he was holding. Maybe he had heard us and stood up after we ran. But nothing about it felt normal. The animal had been standing in the middle of the road, frozen in place. The man had not been visible near the bench. The tiny light had not looked like a phone or cigarette. And the old man was not calling the animal back, speaking to it, or reacting to us. He was just limping toward us. Then he stopped. The fox stopped too. They stood there in the road looking at us. The old man did not wave. He did not ask whether we were okay. He did not call out to us. He did not say anything at all. He just stared. The fox stood in front of him, still and quiet. My friend and I stared back for only a few seconds, but it felt much longer. The old man's face was still too white. His flat cap made him look older than he probably was, but I could not make out much else about him. The darkness hid most of his clothes. I could only see the outline of his body and the slow, uneven way he had walked. He looked like someone who had stepped out of a place where no one should have been. Then my friend and I ran again. This time, we did not stop to look back. We ran as fast as we could, away from the road, away from the trees, away from the bench, away from the fox, and away from the silent old man standing in the darkness. I do not remember exactly how long we ran or where we went first. I only remember the feeling of needing to get somewhere bright, somewhere with people, somewhere that did not have tree branches hanging over the road like a ceiling. Afterward, we tried to make sense of it. The obvious explanation was that it had been an old man walking a dog. That would explain the figure. It would explain the animal. It might even explain the small light near the bench if he had been holding something tiny, like a phone, a lighter, or a cigarette. But it did not explain why the fox was standing completely frozen in the middle of the road. It did not explain why it started following us once we backed away. It did not explain why the man was nowhere to be seen when we first saw the fox. It did not explain why the light was so small and white. And it definitely did not explain why the old man stood in the road silently staring at us after we ran. Maybe he thought we had scared his dog. Maybe he was confused. Maybe he was drunk. Maybe he was simply an elderly man with a pale face, a limp, and a dog that had wandered into the road. Those are all possible. But both of us felt the same fear before we ever saw the man. The road had already felt wrong. The fox had already felt wrong. The white light near the bench had already felt wrong. The old man only made it worse. To this day, I do not know whether it was something supernatural, something dangerous, or simply a series of normal things that looked terrifying in the dark. Maybe we saw a fox that froze because it was frightened. Maybe the rustling was the old man sitting near the bench. Maybe the light was a small flashlight or some reflective object. Maybe he had been walking toward us all along, and the darkness hid him until he reached the edge of the road. But I remember how the fox moved. I remember how it stood perfectly still, as though it had been waiting. I remember how it began coming toward us the moment the music stopped. And I remember the old man limping out of the darkness behind it, his white face turned toward us, saying nothing. Neither of us ever wanted to walk down that road at night again. I just need to get this one off my chest in hopes that somebody believes me. I was around 15 when it happened, and even now, years later, I still cannot decide whether it was simply a weird night with a drunk teenager in distant weather, or whether there was something else going on that none of us understood. At the time, I lived in a pretty normal middle-class suburban town. It was not a big city, but it was not exactly rural either. We had neighborhoods, stores, schools, regular streets, and the kind of places where adults knew each other through work, school, or sports. But if you drove out a little farther, there were smaller towns around us, places with fewer houses, more trees, long stretches of road, and that backwoods feeling where everything gets darker once the streetlights end. The town where my friend Jake lived was one of those places. It was not that far from where I lived, but it always felt different. It felt quieter, more isolated, like there were parts of it that went empty the moment the sun went down. Jake was having a birthday party that night. It was not a real party in the way adults would probably imagine one. There were no decorations, no parents watching over us, no big plan for the evening. It was just a small group of 15-year-old boys hanging around, trying to make a normal night feel exciting. We had brought Palm Bays with us. At 15, that felt like a huge deal. We were drinking sweet canned alcohol, acting older than we were, talking louder than usual, laughing at dumb things, and convincing ourselves that we were having some wild teenage experience. None of us were completely out of control at first. We were just young, stupid, and a little drunk. We thought that made everything funnier. A normal street seemed more interesting. An old school felt creepy in a way it would not have during the day. Every dark patch of trees looked like the beginning of some scary story. Jake lived about a kilometer from our old elementary school. It was close enough to walk there, and that was where we ended up later that night. The school had been empty for hours. The playground was dark. The windows were black. The parking lot had only a few lights around the edges, and most of the building looked like a large shape sitting quietly at the end of the road. I had gone there 1,000 times when I was younger. I knew the halls, the classrooms, the front entrance, the playground equipment, and the parking lot where parents waited in the afternoons. But seeing it at night was different. During the day, it was just a school. At night, with nobody around, it looked unfamiliar. The silence made it worse. There was no traffic nearby, no teachers, no parents, no kids, just our group, a few cans, and the sound of us talking too loudly because we were trying not to notice how empty everything was. We wandered around the edge of the schoolyard and spent some time near the parking lot. At first, everyone was having a good time. We were joking around, messing with each other, probably doing the kind of stupid things 15-year-old boys do when they think they are invincible. Someone was trying to make somebody else laugh. Someone was probably daring another person to do something embarrassing. We were not thinking about ghosts, danger, or anything serious. Then, Jake stopped. He froze in place. At first, none of us noticed. He was standing a little apart from the group, facing toward the parking lot. I thought he was just looking at something or zoning out. People do that when they have been drinking. You stop paying attention for a minute, stare at nothing, and get lost in your own thoughts. But Jake did not move. He stood there staring into the parking lot for a long time. Not 10 seconds, not a minute, more like 15 minutes. At first, we thought it was funny. We were all a little drunk, we were 15, and we had the maturity level you would expect. So instead of asking whether he was okay right away, we started messing with him. Someone balanced something on his head. Maybe an empty can. Maybe some other random thing we had with us. I do not remember exactly what it was. I only remember that Jake did not react. He did not knock it off. He did not laugh. He did not tell us to stop. He just kept staring toward the parking lot. The longer it went on, the less funny it became. The parking lot was mostly empty. There were a few dim lights, but not enough to light the whole area. Beyond the school lot, there were darker sections where the trees and the edge of the road blended together. I looked in the direction Jake was facing. I did not see anything. No people, no cars, no animals, no movement. Just empty pavement, the side of the school, shadows, and the pale spill of the parking lot lights. I remember asking him what he was looking at. He did not answer at first. Then, after standing there in silence for what felt like forever, he spoke. His voice was quiet, not slurred in a joking way, not excited, just quiet. He said, "Hey guys, do you see those guys in the parking lot?" The moment he said it, I felt my stomach drop. I do not know why it scared me so much. Maybe because of how long he had been staring. Maybe because we had all been watching him stand there without reacting to us. Maybe because his tone did not sound like a prank. Whatever it was, the air changed. I looked toward the parking lot again. Harder this time. I scanned every dark area I could see. I looked near the cars. I looked by the school entrance. I looked at the edge of the trees. I looked toward the parts of the lot where the light did not fully reach. There was nothing. I told him, "Bro, you're tripping. There's nothing in the parking lot." I said it casually because I wanted it to be true. I wanted him to laugh and tell us he was joking. But he did not laugh. He kept staring. He looked genuinely focused on something none of us could see. That was when I started feeling uneasy. I was not thinking ghosts at that point. I was thinking maybe Jake had drunk too much. Maybe he was seeing things. Maybe he was having a bad reaction. Or maybe there actually was someone standing somewhere in the dark that we could not make out clearly. The town was quiet. The school was empty. We were underage, drinking, and far enough from Jake's house that nobody could easily hear us if something happened. I suggested we go back to his place. I did not make a big deal out of it. I just said it was getting late, and we should probably head back. The others agreed, probably because the mood had changed for all of us. Nobody wanted to stand around an empty school parking lot while Jake stared at people who were not there. So, we started walking back. The road from the school to Jake's house was not far, around 1 kilometer, maybe a little more depending on where we were standing. In daylight, it would have been an easy walk. At night, in that quiet little town, it felt longer. We had only been walking for a short time when Jake suddenly stopped again. For a second, I thought he had seen something else. Then, he started taking off his clothes. All of them. Not just his jacket. Not just his shirt, because he was hot. He took off everything. At first, nobody knew what to say. We all just stood there watching him because it was so random that it did not register immediately. One moment he was walking with us, quiet and strange after staring into the parking lot. The next moment, he was pulling off his clothes in the middle of the street. Someone asked what he was doing. Someone else probably laughed because when you are 15, you laugh when you are uncomfortable. Jake did not answer. He dropped his clothes on the ground. Then, he took off running. He sprinted down the road toward his house completely naked. He was gone before any of us could really react. For a moment, we just stood there in silence. His clothes were scattered on the road. The night felt much colder all of a sudden. I remember looking at the others and thinking that this had gone from weird to genuinely unsettling. We were all drunk enough to be confused, but not so drunk that we could not understand how strange it was. Jake had been staring into an empty parking lot for 15 minutes. He had asked whether we saw people there. Then, he had taken off all his clothes and sprinted home without saying a word. None of us knew what to do. We picked up his clothes. There were 5 of us in total, including me. We gathered everything as best we could, carrying his shirt, pants, shoes, whatever he had thrown down. Nobody wanted to leave his things in the road. We also did not want to stand there longer than we had to. The mood was completely different now. Nobody was joking much. Nobody was acting like the night was fun anymore. We started walking toward Jake's house, holding his clothes and trying to make sense of what had happened. Maybe he had just gotten too drunk. That was the explanation we kept going back to. Maybe he had freaked himself out. Maybe he had seen something in the darkness and panicked. Maybe he thought it would be funny to run home naked. Maybe he was trying to prove something. But none of it felt right. Jake was having a good time earlier. He had not seemed angry, depressed, or sick. He had not been drinking more than the rest of us. He had just suddenly gone quiet and stared at something we could not see. As we walked, the sky lit up. It looked like lightning had struck somewhere in the distance. The entire sky flashed white for a moment. Not bright enough to turn night into day, but enough that the road, trees, houses, and all of us were briefly visible. It was one of those flashes that makes you see everything in a hard, colorless way for half a second. Then the darkness came back. We all stopped. I waited for thunder. Nothing happened. No distant rumble, no crack, no echo. Nothing, just silence. At first I thought maybe the thunder was delayed. Lightning can strike far away, and sound takes time to travel. We all know that. So we stood there for a few seconds, waiting, still nothing. Then about a minute later, the sky flashed again. Same thing, a broad white flicker in the distance. No sound, The flashes kept happening as we walked. Every minute or so, maybe a little longer, the sky would suddenly light up. Then darkness. Then silence. It was not constant enough to feel like a normal storm right over us. It was not close enough that we heard thunder. But in the state we were already in, it felt wrong. The flashes made the street look different each time. For a second, we could see the trees along the road. We could see each other carrying Jake's clothes. We could see the empty houses and driveways. Then, the light would vanish, and the darkness would swallow everything again. Nobody liked it. We started walking faster. I remember looking over my shoulder more than once, half expecting to see someone following us from the school. I thought about the people Jake had asked about in the parking lot. I thought about how he had been staring into the darkness, looking at something no one else could see. Every flash made me nervous. I would look toward the road ahead and expect to see something standing there. But there was nothing. Just the road. Just the trees. Just 5 teenage boys trying to get back to a house while carrying another boy's clothes. Eventually, we got to Jake's place. The house looked normal from the outside. There were lights on inside. It did not look like anything unusual had happened there. That should have made me feel better, but I was still unsettled. We went in and found Jake crashed on his bed. He was asleep, not pacing, not panicking, not acting strange, just asleep. He had somehow made it home, gotten into his room, and passed out. I remember standing there looking at him, wondering what the hell had happened. We had been walking behind him not long after he ran off. There was no way he should have been completely calm and asleep that quickly, unless he had gone straight home, gotten into bed, and collapsed. Maybe that was exactly what happened. Maybe he had panicked, sprinted home, and passed out from the alcohol and adrenaline. We put his clothes somewhere nearby and tried to settle down. But nobody really talked about it much that night. There are moments when a group of people experiences something strange, and nobody knows how to discuss it without making it worse. That was what it felt like. We had all seen the sky flash. We had all seen Jake strip and run. We had all watched him stare into the empty parking lot. But none of us had an explanation that made sense. The next morning, I looked up the flashing sky. I wanted a normal answer. I needed one. I searched for silent lightning, distant flashes, lightning without thunder, and anything else I could think of. The closest thing I found was sheet lightning. From what I understood, it described distant lightning that lights up the sky without the thunder being loud enough to hear where you are. That made sense. If a storm was far away, maybe we saw the flashes but never heard the sound. That explanation helped a little. I told myself that was what it was. Sheet lightning. Nothing supernatural. Nothing impossible. Just distant weather happening at the same time as a bunch of 15-year-olds were drinking and getting scared in the dark. And I told myself Jake had just been drunk. He had probably seen shadows in the parking lot. Maybe the lights made the trees look like people. Maybe his mind turned some ordinary shapes into figures. Maybe he was trying to be funny and took things too far. But the explanation never sat completely right with me. It still does not. Because of the feeling. That is the part I cannot explain. The whole night felt uneasy before the lightning started. It felt wrong when Jake froze. It felt wrong when he stared into the parking lot. It felt wrong when he asked if we could see those guys. And it felt even worse when he took off all his clothes and ran home like he was trying to escape something. The flashing sky might have had a normal explanation. The drinking might have explained some of Jake's behavior. But it does not explain why the moment felt so heavy. It does not explain why none of us wanted to stay near that school. It does not explain why I still remember the silence after every flash. Years later, I asked Jake about it. He did not remember. He did not remember staring into the parking lot. He did not remember asking us if we saw people. He did not remember taking off his clothes. He did not remember sprinting home. As far as he was concerned, it was just a normal birthday night. That made it worse somehow, because if he had remembered being scared, at least I could understand it. If he had said he saw something strange, heard something, or felt sick, then maybe we could compare stories. But he remembered nothing. I do not hang out with those guys anymore. Life moved on. People changed. We stopped seeing each other regularly, and that night became one of those stories from being 15 that nobody really wants to revisit. Whenever I have told people about it, most do not believe me. They assume we were drunk. They assume Jake was acting stupid. They assume the flashes were distant lightning. And honestly, those are fair explanations. I was there, though. I saw Jake standing in front of that school parking lot for 15 minutes, completely still. I heard him ask whether we could see people who were not there. I watched him take off all his clothes and run through the street toward home. I saw the sky flash over and over without a sound. And I remember how afraid I felt walking back to Jake's house with his clothes in my hands. Maybe it was just one strange night. Maybe nothing supernatural happened. Maybe the whole thing was bad timing, alcohol, darkness, and weather. But there is still a part of me that wonders what Jake saw in that parking lot, and why, after seeing it, he ran home like he could not get away fast enough. I had been living on my own for the first time for about 3 months when the first thing happened. It was still new to me then. I was getting used to the quiet, getting used to coming home to an empty apartment, getting used to the fact that every sound in the place was mine to deal with. When you live with family, roommates, or a partner, there is always some explanation for a strange noise. Somebody dropped something. Somebody left a door open. Somebody moved something and forgot to mention it. Living alone changes that. Every sound has nowhere else to go. The apartment itself was normal enough. It was not especially old, and I had never heard stories about anything happening there. There were neighbors nearby, maintenance people came through when needed, and the building had the usual sounds that apartments have. Pipes clicked sometimes. Doors opened and shut down the hallway. I could hear someone walking above or beside me once in a while. Nothing about it felt scary at first. I had gone on a day trip and gotten home late one night. I was tired from being out all day, tired from traveling back, and happy to be home. I probably came in, dropped my things, checked that everything was locked, and went straight to bed. The next morning, I was sitting down to eat breakfast when I heard a beeping sound from the main hall. At first, I barely reacted. Smoke detectors beep sometimes. Everyone knows that sound. A low, sharp chirp every so often, usually because a battery is getting weak. It is annoying, but it is normal. I assumed that was all it was. The beeping came again. I put down whatever I was eating and walked into the hallway. The smoke detector was mounted high up near the ceiling. It had been there since I moved in. I had seen it dozens of times without ever paying it much attention. But when I looked up that morning, I immediately noticed something was wrong. The battery compartment was open, not loose, not hanging slightly open. Open, the little cover had been pulled back, and the battery was gone. I stood there for a moment, staring at it. My first thought was that maybe the battery had fallen out somehow. Maybe the compartment had not been shut properly. Maybe the vibration from a door closing had opened it. Maybe the battery was old, loose, or not fitted correctly. It sounded unlikely, but it was still more reasonable than anything else. I checked the floor. Nothing. I looked under the small table near the hallway wall. I checked along the baseboards. I moved shoes and bags out of the way. I looked behind furniture that was close enough for the battery to have rolled under. It was not there. That made me uneasy. A battery can fall out, sure, but it cannot disappear. It had to be somewhere in the apartment if it had simply dropped. Yet there was nothing on the floor beneath the detector, nothing nearby, and nothing that looked like it had rolled away. Then I started thinking about maintenance. Maybe someone had come in while I was out on the day trip. It would not have been impossible. Buildings sometimes do inspections or repairs. Maybe the battery was being replaced and someone got distracted. Maybe a maintenance worker opened the compartment, took the old battery out, and forgot to put in a new one. It did not explain why they would do that without leaving a note, but it was still a normal explanation. I checked my cameras. I had cameras in the apartment because I was living alone for the first time and wanted the extra peace of mind. They were not hidden spy cameras or anything dramatic. They were simple security cameras pointed at the main entry and areas where I could see whether someone had entered. I went through the footage from while I was away. Nobody came in. No maintenance worker. No landlord. No neighbor. No one. The cameras showed the apartment staying empty until I got home. I checked again, thinking maybe I had missed something. Maybe someone entered quickly. Maybe the camera did not catch them properly. But there was nothing. No person walking through the hall. No door opening. No movement that explained why the smoke detector's battery had been removed. That was when the situation started to feel less like an inconvenience and more like a question. I had lived there for 3 months. If the smoke detector had never had a battery in it, I would have known. It would have been chirping long before then. I would have noticed the open compartment, or the detector would have started making noise when I moved in, but it had been fine. It had been normal. The battery had been there. Then, after I came home from a day trip, it was gone. I did not know what else to do, so I tried to let it go. Things happen. Maybe I had overlooked the battery somewhere. Maybe the detector had malfunctioned. Maybe the battery had been removed earlier and I somehow had not noticed. Maybe I was overthinking it because I lived alone and had nobody else around to reassure me. So I went out and bought new batteries. I replaced the missing one, shut the compartment properly, and made sure it was secure. I even pressed the test button to confirm the detector worked. It gave the loud, normal alarm sound, and I felt better for a while. I told myself it was fixed. A few nights later, I woke up to another beep. This time, it came from my study. The sound was quieter at first because I was half asleep. I remember lying in bed trying to figure out whether I had dreamed it. Then, it happened again. A sharp chirp. Then another. I sat up. The study was not far from my bedroom. It was the room where I kept my desk, computer, and whatever work or personal things I needed space for. I did not spend much time in there at night, so hearing a smoke detector beep from that room felt stranger than it should have. I got out of bed and walked down the hall. The apartment was dark. There is something different about walking through your own home in the middle of the night when you live alone. In daylight, every room belongs to you. At night, with only the weak glow from outside and the lights turned off, familiar rooms can feel separate. The hallway seems longer. Doorways seem darker. You notice the silence between every sound. I reached the study and turned on the light. The smoke detector's battery compartment was wide open. The battery was gone. Again, for a few seconds, I just stood there. I did not touch it right away. I looked at the open compartment and felt the same confusion from the first time, but stronger now. The main hall detector might have been a weird accident. This was not. The compartment was not cracked. The battery was not hanging loose. It had been opened. The battery had been removed. And it was not on the floor. I checked anyway. I looked beneath the desk. I checked behind the chair. I moved cables, boxes, and papers. I checked under the shelves. I checked every place it could possibly have rolled. Nothing. Then I checked the cameras again. No one had entered. No one had been in the study. No one had come through the front door. The footage gave me nothing. That was when I started locking everything more carefully. I checked the front door several times before bed. I checked windows. I checked the chain. I checked the cameras before I went to sleep. I started noticing every small sound in the building. Maybe someone had a key. Maybe someone could get in without the camera catching them. Maybe one of the cameras had a blind spot. Maybe I had sleepwalked and removed the battery myself. That possibility bothered me, but it was still a possibility. Maybe I had gotten up in the middle of the night without remembering. Maybe I had done something strange while half asleep. People do weird things when they are exhausted, but I did not remember touching the detector. And even if I had, why would I take the battery out and hide it somewhere? Why would I do it more than once? A few weeks passed. Nothing happened. The quiet returned, at least on the surface. I kept the new batteries and the smoke detectors and tried not to think about it too much. I did not tell many people because I knew how it would sound. Somebody would say it was a glitch. Somebody would say I was paranoid. Somebody would say I had forgotten taking them out myself. Maybe they would have been right. Then it happened in my bedroom. I woke up to the same chirping sound. This time, I knew exactly what it was before I opened my eyes. I lay still for a second, listening. The beep came from above me, the smoke detector in my bedroom. I remember a cold feeling moving through me before I even got out of bed. I turned on the lamp. Then I looked up. The compartment was open. The battery was gone. For a moment, I did not move. I was sitting in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to make myself believe I was seeing something else. I wanted it to be a loose cover. I wanted the battery to be hanging there. I wanted there to be a simple mechanical reason. But it was the same as before. The compartment had been opened. The battery had been removed. And I had been asleep underneath it. I checked the room. I checked the floor around the bed. I checked under the bed. I checked beside the dresser. I checked the closet. I checked everywhere. The battery was not there. I did not sleep much that night. After that, I started wondering whether I was actually safe in the apartment. Not in a supernatural way at first, in a practical way. I wondered if someone had access to the place. I wondered if there was some kind of problem with the building. I wondered whether my cameras were not capturing everything. I wondered whether someone was entering when I was asleep or away and doing things just subtle enough to make me doubt myself. But there was no evidence. The locks were untouched. The cameras showed no one coming in. Nothing else was missing. No doors were left open. No furniture had moved. The only thing that kept happening was the smoke detector batteries disappearing. It was almost worse that way. If someone had broken in, stolen something, left a message, or damaged the apartment, I would have had a clear problem to solve. I could have called the police, changed the locks, talked to the landlord, or moved. But this was smaller, more personal, and harder to prove. The battery compartments were open. The batteries were gone. And nobody had been there. I lived in that apartment for another 2 years. The smoke detector thing did not keep happening constantly. In fact, after the third time, nothing else like that happened again. No more missing batteries, no more open compartments, no more beeping in the middle of the night. But strange things continued on and off. Not every day, not even every week, just enough that I could never completely forget what had happened. Sometimes I would see a flash of blue light out of the corner of my eye. It would happen quickly. I might be walking down the hall, sitting at my desk, making food, or lying in bed. Something blue would flicker at the edge of my vision, like a small burst of cold light, then vanish before I could turn my head. At first, I blamed electronics. Maybe it was a reflection from a screen, maybe a notification light, maybe headlights outside hitting something at the right angle. Maybe the television or computer was reflecting off a window. But sometimes it happened when everything was off. Sometimes it happened in rooms with no screens nearby. Sometimes I would turn toward the place where I saw it and find nothing but darkness. The blue flashes did not seem to have a pattern. They were not always in the same room. They were not always at the same time. They did not happen often enough for me to capture on camera or explain. They were just there 1 second and gone the next. Then there were the bruises. I would wake up with bruises on my forearms that looked like fingerprints. Not just a random bruise in one spot, not the kind you get from bumping into furniture and forget about. They looked like individual finger-shaped marks, as though someone had gripped my arm hard enough to leave an imprint. The first time I noticed them, I tried to think back over the previous day. Maybe I had carried something heavy. Maybe I had bumped into a doorway. Maybe I had caught my arm against the edge of a desk or chair. Maybe I had slept in a strange position and put pressure on myself somehow. But the marks did not make sense. They were on my forearms in places I did not remember injuring. Sometimes they appeared in a pattern that looked too much like a hand. I would stare at them in the morning and try to remember whether anyone had grabbed me. But I lived alone. There was no one there to grab me. I never got a clear answer for any of it. There were no voices, no figures standing in rooms, no objects flying across the apartment. Nothing that would make a clean, dramatic ghost story. Just small things. Open compartments. Missing batteries. A blue flash at the edge of my vision. Bruises that looked like fingers. Things that could maybe be explained one at a time, but felt harder to explain when they all happened in the same place. I tried to be rational. Maybe the smoke detectors had faulty compartments. Maybe the batteries fell into places I never found. Maybe the cameras missed something because of a technical issue. Maybe the blue flashes were eye strain, reflections, or tiredness. Maybe the bruises were from sleep, exercise, furniture, or things I did not remember doing. All of that is possible. But when I think about those first 3 months, I always come back to the same image. Me standing beneath a smoke detector, looking up at an empty battery compartment. The cover open. The battery missing. No sign of it anywhere. And no sign that anyone had come into my home. Living alone was supposed to make me feel independent. Instead, for a while, it made me feel like I was never completely alone. A few years ago, I lived in a small town and worked nights at one of those major retailers everyone recognizes. I will not say which one, but it was the kind of place that stayed open late, had a huge parking lot, and sat near the edge of town, where the buildings slowly gave way to open countryside. During the day, the view from the parking lot was actually kind of nice. Beyond the road, there were fields, low hills, scattered trees, and a long tree line stretching across the distance. You could see a lot of the surrounding countryside from the higher end of the lot. In the daytime, it looked ordinary. Quiet roads, farms or empty land, bits of forest, maybe the occasional distant light from a house. At night, it looked completely different. The store itself was always bright. The parking lot lights cast this harsh white glow over the pavement, the shopping cart corrals, and the rows of parked cars. But beyond the edge of the lot, where the road crossed toward the countryside, the light ended quickly. Past that point, there was almost nothing. A dark road. A few reflective signs. The black outline of the tree line. Then, open darkness. I worked a lot of late shifts there, so I got used to seeing that view after midnight. There was something strangely peaceful about leaving after the store had quieted down. The usual rush was gone. The customers were gone. The noise from the registers, carts, scanners, announcements, and people talking all day had finally faded. By the time the night shift was ending, the building felt exhausted. The floors had been cleaned, or were being cleaned. Employees were finishing up their last tasks. People were clocking out in small groups. Some would leave right away, while others stood in the parking lot for a few minutes, talking, smoking, or sitting in their cars before driving home. I often took a little time before leaving, not because I wanted to stay at work, but because after a long shift, I liked standing outside for a minute and letting my head clear. The air was usually colder at night, especially in a small town where there was not much traffic or city heat. Sometimes I would stand near my car, check my phone, listen to the quiet, and look out toward the road and the trees. That was what I was doing the night I saw it. It must have been around 12:30 or 1:00 in the morning. I remember it was late enough that the parking lot had mostly emptied. There were still a few employee cars scattered around, but the place did not feel busy anymore. Most of the overhead lights were humming above the pavement. The store behind me was still lit up, but beyond the road, everything was black. I was tired. Not falling asleep tired, but that dull end-of-shift kind of tired where your body is ready to be home. I had probably just clocked out. I may have been walking to my car or standing near it, trying to decide whether to sit for a few minutes before driving. Then I looked across the road. At first, I saw nothing unusual. The tree line was dark as always. It was a thick line of trees in the distance, with the top branches blending into the night sky. There were no headlights coming down the road. No houses had lights on that I could see. No one was walking around out there. Then, something bright rose from behind the trees. It shot straight upward. For a second, my brain did not understand what I was seeing. The light was incredibly bright. It was not like a flashlight or headlights. It was not a normal glowing object near the ground. It came up from somewhere beyond the tree line and climbed directly into the sky in one fast, almost perfect vertical line. It looked like a meteor going the wrong direction. That is still the closest comparison I have. Everyone knows what a shooting star or meteor looks like. Something flashes across the sky, angled downward or sideways, leaving a trail behind it. This was the opposite. It seemed to launch upward from the Earth itself. It was like someone had taken a bright white meteor and fired it straight into the heavens. The thing rose so fast that I barely had time to process it. But it also went so far that it felt impossible. A firework was the first explanation that crossed my mind, because what else could shoot upward from the ground at night? But I had seen fireworks before. Everyone has. Fireworks rise. They have a visible arc. They tend to leave a trail, and they usually burst or fade after reaching a certain height. This did not look like that. It was much brighter. It rose much higher, and it did not seem to arc at all. It just went up. Straight up. The bright point climbed above the tree line, past the height where I would expect a firework to fade, and kept going. It looked like it reached into the upper sky, high enough that my mind started trying to understand whether I was seeing something that had gone into the atmosphere. I know that sounds ridiculous, but it was so far above the trees by the time it faded that I could not make it fit into anything normal. It did not explode. It did not break apart. It did not leave a big burst of color. It did not make a loud sound. I do not remember hearing anything at all. 1 second, the light was rising from somewhere behind the dark tree line. Then, it was gone. The entire thing may have lasted only a few seconds, but I remember it clearly because it was so wrong. I stood there in the parking lot, staring at the sky where it had disappeared. I remember waiting for something else to happen. Maybe a delayed boom, maybe another flash, maybe a trail of smoke drifting across the sky, maybe lights appearing farther out in the fields. Nothing happened. The sky was empty. The tree line was black. The road was quiet. And I was alone in the parking lot, with this image burned into my mind. For a while, I just stood there. I kept trying to explain it to myself. Maybe it was a firework from somewhere farther away than I realized. Maybe it had been launched behind the trees, and the distance made it appear higher than it was. Maybe there had been no sound because it was far away, but it did not feel like a firework. Even at the time, before anyone had said anything strange to me, I knew it did not look like one. It was too clean, too direct, too bright, and it went too high. Then I wondered whether it could have been some kind of flare. That seemed possible for a moment. Maybe someone had launched a flare from a field, a road, or some private property. But again, it did not behave the way I expected a flare to behave. It did not hang in the sky or drift downward. It did not glow slowly as it fell. It shot upward and vanished. I thought about planes. Maybe it was some kind of aircraft light seen at a strange angle. Maybe a plane had been coming toward me or moving away so quickly that it looked like it rose straight up. But there was no sound, no blinking lights, no slow approach, no shape. Just one bright thing going vertically into the night. I eventually got into my car and went home, but I could not stop thinking about it. All the way back, I kept looking through the windshield whenever the road opened up enough to see the sky. I half expected to see another light. I half expected to see something hovering over the trees or moving in the distance. But there was nothing. By the time I got home, I had mostly convinced myself that there had to be some normal explanation. It was late. I was tired. The parking lot lights might have affected how I saw it. Maybe I had seen an ordinary thing from an unusual angle. Maybe I had exaggerated the height because of the dark sky and lack of reference points. Still, when I went to sleep, I kept seeing that bright line rising above the trees. The next day, I went back to work. I had not planned to tell many people. I knew how it would sound. If I said I saw a bright object shoot straight up into the sky from behind a tree line, people would probably laugh, tell me it was a firework, or act like I was trying to tell a UFO story. But while I was working, I ended up talking to one of my coworkers. He was not someone I was especially close with. We worked together, talked sometimes, joked around when the shift was slow, but we were not friends outside work. He was one of those people who always had something slightly off about him. Not necessarily dangerous, not necessarily bad, just sketchy. He was the kind of guy who always seemed to know more than he said. Sometimes he would disappear for a while during a shift and come back acting like nothing happened. Sometimes he would tell stories that were probably true but sounded impossible. He had a way of looking around before he spoke, as though he expected someone to be listening. Most people at work thought he was odd, but he could also be funny. That morning, he was joking around with me like usual. We were talking about normal work stuff, complaining about customers, talking about how late the shift had run, whatever came up. Then I mentioned what I saw. I did not make a huge deal out of it at first. I said something like, "You know that tree line across from the parking lot? Last night I saw this crazy bright thing shoot straight up behind it. It looked like a firework, but it went way too high." He laughed at first, Not a nervous laugh, more like he assumed I was telling some exaggerated story from the night before. He made some kind of joke about aliens or fireworks or me being tired. I laughed, too, because that was what I expected. I was not trying to convince him of anything. I just thought it was strange enough to mention. Then I described it a little more. I told him it rose straight up. I told him how bright it was. I told him it did not explode. I told him it looked almost like a vertical meteor. That was when he stopped laughing. He went silent, completely silent. It was so sudden that I noticed immediately. 1 second, he was joking with me. The next, he was staring at me with this serious look on his face. I remember feeling uncomfortable right away. He looked around, not casually. He actually looked over both shoulders, checking the area around us. He looked toward the aisle, the front end, the brake area, wherever people might have been nearby. It was like he was making sure no one else was listening. Then, he leaned closer. His voice was low when he spoke. He said, "Never tell anyone else what you saw." For a second, I thought he was still joking. I waited for him to smile or laugh. He did not. I asked what he meant. He did not answer directly. I asked him whether he knew what it was. He looked around again, then told me not to worry about it. He said it was not my business. That was it. No explanation. No, I saw it too. No, there are fireworks out there. No, it is some military thing. No clue about what he thought he knew. Just a warning. Never tell anyone else what you saw. I remember feeling cold after he said that. It was not because I suddenly believed there was some huge secret being hidden in the countryside. I knew he was a strange guy. I knew he could have been messing with me. He may have heard a weird story somewhere and decided to make me uncomfortable for fun. But the way he said it did not feel like a joke. He looked genuinely nervous. And once he said it, I could not stop thinking about the light again. I wanted to ask him more. I wanted to know if he had seen anything from that parking lot before. I wanted to know whether he knew what was behind the tree line. I wanted to know why he acted like I had mentioned something dangerous. But he shut the conversation down. Every time I tried to bring it back up, he would either change the subject or tell me to leave it alone. It was not my business. Do not worry about it. Forget you saw it. Those were the kinds of things he kept saying. For the rest of the shift, I felt uneasy. I kept looking toward the parking lot whenever I could. I kept thinking about how normal everything looked in daylight. The road was there. The fields were there. The trees were there. Cars passed by. People came and went. Nothing in the view suggested anything unusual. But at night, that same line of trees had looked like the edge of something I could not see. A few weeks later, that coworker stopped working there. He did not make a big announcement. He was just gone. At first, I assumed he had quit or been fired. People came and went from that place all the time. Retail jobs had a high turnover. Someone would work there for a few months, disappear, and you would never hear from them again. But because of what he had said, his disappearance stuck with me. I asked around once or twice. Nobody seemed to know much. Some people said he quit. Some said he had issues outside work. Some said he stopped showing up. I never got a clear answer, and I never heard from him again. I never saw him around town. I never ran into him anywhere else. It was like he had simply vanished from my life after telling me to keep quiet about the thing in the sky. I still do not know what I saw that night. I am not claiming it was aliens. I am not claiming it was a secret government operation. I am not saying it was definitely anything supernatural or impossible. There could be a perfectly normal explanation. Maybe it was a rocket launch from farther away than I understood. Maybe it was some kind of industrial flare. Maybe it was a strange firework. Maybe it was a meteor that only appeared to move upward because of my angle and the way I saw it. Maybe I was tired enough that I misunderstood what I was looking at. And maybe my coworker was just being creepy because he thought it would be funny. That is possible too. He was sketchy. He liked acting mysterious. He may have seen that I was unsettled and decided to make it worse. Maybe he did not know anything at all. Maybe he only said what he said because he wanted to feel important. But I remember the look on his face. I remember how he stopped joking. I remember how he checked whether anyone was listening. I remember the quiet way he said, "Never tell anyone else what you saw." And I remember the light. A bright white thing rising behind a dark tree line. Straight up, higher than any firework I had ever seen. Then disappearing into the night sky like it had never been there at all. I still think about it sometimes when I see a parking lot at night, especially one near open fields or a line of trees. I think about how much can be hidden just beyond the reach of artificial light. A road can look empty. A field can look empty. A tree line can look like nothing but darkness. And then, for a few seconds, something can rise out of it and make you question what you thought you knew. I do not know what it was. I do not know why my coworker reacted the way he did. And I do not know why, after he warned me not to tell anyone, he disappeared from that job a few weeks later. But it happened, and it still weirds me out to this day. Forgive me for stepping in for just a moment. If you've only recently found your way here, then welcome. I'm glad you came. If these stories are keeping you company tonight, consider subscribing to Crowvane Manor. New stories arrive here often, the kind that stay with you long after the night is over. And if you tap the bell, you won't have to go looking. The next one will find you on its own. Thank you for being here. Now, let's return to where we left off. I was 16 at the time, and I had always loved looking at the sky. I was the kind of person who would step outside at night just to see the stars, especially when the neighborhood was quiet and there were no clouds in the way. I liked trying to spot constellations, satellites, airplanes, and anything else moving across the dark. So that night, I glanced outside. At first, everything looked normal. It was dark enough that most of the yard had disappeared into shadow. The trees were black shapes against the sky. The street was quiet. There were no cars passing, no people outside, no fireworks, no noise coming from nearby houses. Then, I noticed colors in the sky. Lots of colors. At first, I thought I was seeing reflections in the window. Maybe the lights inside the house were catching the glass in a strange way. That can happen at night. You look through a window and see something bright, only to realize you are looking at a reflection of a lamp or television behind you. But these colors were outside. They were high above the trees. They were moving. I stood there for a moment, staring through the glass, trying to understand what I was looking at. The lights were not scattered randomly across the sky. They were not blinking like airplane lights. They were not rising and falling the way fireworks do. They were organized. They seemed to move together. It looked almost like a light show, except there was no reason for a light show to be happening. It was Earth Day. It was not the 4th of July. There was no festival nearby that I knew of. There were no fireworks going off. There was no music, no crowd, no sound of people celebrating anything. The colors just kept moving. They shifted in patterns that seemed planned. That was what made me curious enough to go outside. I ran out of the house and stood in the yard, looking up. The sky was clear enough that I could see the lights more clearly now. There were several of them, maybe more than I could count properly because they kept shifting. They were bright, but they did not throw light down onto the ground like a spotlight. They stayed high above us, moving around in a way that was hard to follow. At first, I tried to convince myself they were helicopters. Then I thought maybe they were planes. But they did not move like either one. The lights would hold still for a moment. Then they would shift sideways. Then they would drift together. Then they would spread out again. The movements were too smooth and too controlled. They did not look like aircraft following normal flight paths. They did not seem to circle the way helicopters circle. They did not blink in a regular pattern. They did not travel steadily from one point in the sky to another. They seemed to be performing. That is the only word I can use for it. The lights were moving as if they were part of some coordinated show. They would rise, pause, move into formation, and change position together. It felt less like watching things flying through the sky and more like watching something arranged on purpose. I stood there for a few seconds trying to take it all in. Then I called for my brother and nephew to come outside. I did not want to be the only one seeing it. I remember yelling for them, telling them to hurry up and look at the sky. At first, they probably thought I was overreacting. I was 16, excited, and shouting from outside late at night. They may have assumed I saw a shooting star or something else normal. But when they came outside and looked up, they stopped. They saw it too. That part matters to me more than anything else. I was not alone. My brother saw the colors. My nephew saw the lights. We all stood there in the yard, staring up at the same part of the sky. And all three of us knew that whatever we were looking at was not behaving normally. The lights began to take shape. At first, it was subtle. They seemed to line up in groups, with a brighter point at one end and other lights forming around it. Then, one set of lights settled into a triangle, not a vague shape that you only see if you want to see it. A clear triangle. The points were bright enough that I could see the outline between them. It looked like something large was there in the dark, with the lights showing its edges. Then the triangle slowly spun. It did not turn quickly or wobble like a distant airplane changing direction. It rotated in place. Slowly, smoothly, as it turned, I could make out a shape around the lights. That was when I stopped thinking I was watching fireworks or some kind of random aerial display. It looked like an aircraft. Not a normal airplane, though. It had a solid outline. The triangle shape seemed to be part of a larger dark object. The lights marked its edges, and as it rotated, I could see that there was something physical between them. It was difficult to judge how large it was because it was high above us, but it did not look small. It looked huge. The strange thing was that it did not seem to be moving forward. It was hovering. I had seen airplanes before. I knew planes needed to keep moving. I knew they could circle, climb, descend, or pass overhead, but they did not usually just stay still in the sky. At least not in the way this thing was staying still. I had seen helicopters too. Helicopters can hover, of course, but they make noise. You hear them long before you see them. You hear the blades chopping through the air. You hear the vibration. You hear that heavy, repeating sound that gets louder as they come closer. This thing made no sound. It hovered above us in silence. Then it started bobbing and weaving. Not wildly. Not like it was being pushed around by wind. It would tilt slightly, move in one direction, pause, and then shift again. It looked as if it was floating on something invisible. It moved with a kind of control that made my skin crawl. The triangle turned again. I could see the outline more clearly for a moment. Then, another set of lights formed into a similar shape nearby. There were several objects in the sky now. Not just one. They were all different distances apart, but they seemed connected somehow. They moved in patterns. They held their positions. They changed shape and formation. Some appeared as triangular outlines, and others looked like bright colored points that moved around the larger dark shapes. My brother and I started getting scared. At first, it had been exciting. It felt like seeing something rare and incredible. But the longer we watched, the more wrong it felt. These things were not acting like anything we understood. My nephew was only 6. He was old enough to know something strange was happening, but too young to make sense of it. He kept looking up, then looking at us, trying to understand why everyone had gone quiet. The atmosphere in the yard changed. Nobody was laughing. Nobody was joking. There was no way to explain it away while we were still watching it happen. Then we heard a sound that made all of us look in a different direction. Vroom, 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 vroom. At first, the sound was far away. Then it got louder. It came from somewhere beyond the trees, low and heavy, building fast enough that it felt like it was rolling toward us. The sound was not like a passenger plane. It was deeper than that, more powerful. It had the heavy, mechanical pulse of military helicopters. We looked up again. 3 large helicopters came flying overhead. They were low, much lower than anything I was used to seeing. They passed over the house at a height that made them feel enormous. I could see the size of the bodies, the blades, and the shape of them moving through the sky. They were not news helicopters. They were not police helicopters. They looked like military aircraft. The rotor noise shook the air around us. It was loud enough to make us flinch. It was loud enough that the quiet night disappeared completely under the sound. The helicopters flew directly over us, one after another. Not 1. Not 2. 3. They were moving fast and low, heading in the direction of the strange lights. I remember standing in the yard, looking from the helicopters to the objects in the sky, trying to understand what was happening. The large helicopters were clearly going somewhere, and it looked like they were heading toward the things above us. That was when the fear became real. Before that, I could still tell myself it was some unusual flight display, a test, a strange kind of aircraft, or some distant event that looked bigger than it was. But seeing military helicopters moving toward the objects made it feel like there was a response happening, like someone else had noticed them, too. The helicopters moved across the sky in the direction of the lights. The objects above us held still for only a few seconds longer. Then they moved. The first one shot upward. It did not gradually climb. It did not turn and accelerate the way an airplane would. It just went straight up. 1 second it was hovering in the sky, and the next it was gone so quickly that my eyes could barely follow it. It moved like a bullet. Then the others scattered. There were maybe 4 or 5 of them, though I cannot say the exact number with certainty. They split in different directions. One moved upward. Another streaked sideways. Others seemed to shoot off at angles so quickly that they disappeared almost instantly. The speed was unbelievable. They did not drift away. They did not slowly fly off. They were there, and then they were gone. As they moved, we heard sharp snapping sounds. Snap, crack, the sound reminded me of a jet breaking the sound barrier, or at least what I imagined that would sound like. It was not one loud explosion. It was a series of sudden cracks that followed the objects as they disappeared into different parts of the sky. The sound came after the movement. It was as if they had already gone before the noise caught up to us. I had never seen anything move that fast. I had never heard anything sound like that overhead. My nephew started panicking. He was 6 years old, and suddenly the night sky was full of strange lights, huge helicopters, and sharp cracking sounds. He got scared and started crying or yelling. I remember him being overwhelmed by it. My brother looked at the sky one more time and said, "Fuck this." Then he ran inside. I do not blame him. I was scared too. But I did not run immediately. I froze. I stood there in the yard looking up at the place where the lights had been. The helicopters were still moving in the distance, but the strange triangular objects were gone. The sky looked empty again. For a moment, it was almost worse that way. The darkness returned so quickly. The strange lights were gone. The flashing colors were gone. The shapes were gone. But I knew I had just seen them. I knew my brother had seen them. I knew my nephew had seen them. And all I could do was stand there, frozen, trying to understand whether what had happened was real. Eventually, I went inside too. None of us talked about it properly that night. I think we were too scared and too confused. My brother was shaken up. My nephew was upset. I kept replaying everything in my head, trying to make the pieces fit together. The lights, the triangles, the silence, the hovering, the movement, the helicopters, the speed, the cracking sounds. Nothing felt like it belonged in the same normal world I had lived in before that night. At first, I wondered whether we had seen some kind of military exercise. That seemed possible. Maybe there were unusual aircraft in the area. Maybe the helicopters were responding to some training operation. Maybe the colored lights had been aircraft lights seen from a strange angle. Maybe the triangular shapes were caused by darkness, distance, and the way the lights moved. But the silence did not fit. The hovering did not fit. The sudden speed did not fit. And the way the objects scattered in different directions did not fit anything I had ever seen before. I had watched planes and helicopters in the sky for years. I knew the difference between a distant aircraft and something close. I knew the sound a helicopter made. I knew the way planes banked and climbed. Whatever those objects were, they did not move like normal aircraft. I did not have a camera with me. Nobody recorded it. There was no proof besides the memories of the 3 people who stood in the yard that night. For a long time, I wondered whether I had imagined it. Maybe I had gotten caught up in seeing lights, and my mind had turned them into shapes. Maybe the helicopters were unrelated. Maybe the colors were reflections or fireworks from far away. Maybe the sound of the helicopters made everything seem more dramatic than it was. But I could not ignore the fact that my brother remembered it. He was there. He saw the same lights. He saw the triangular shapes. He heard the helicopters. He saw the objects disappear. Years later, we could still describe the same basic event. And my nephew remembered it too. He was only 6 when it happened, so I did not expect him to remember much. Children forget things. Memories change over time. Details become mixed up with stories adults tell afterward. But when he got older, he remembered the night. He remembered being outside. He remembered the strange lights. He remembered being scared. He remembered the helicopters coming over the house. He remembered his father figure, my brother, running inside. He remembered enough that I knew it had not simply been a dream that only existed in my head. The fact that all 3 of us remembered it has always stayed with me. That does not mean I know what it was. I do not. I cannot say that the objects were alien spacecraft. I cannot say they were secret military aircraft. I cannot say the helicopters were chasing them or trying to stop them. That is only how it looked from where we stood. The helicopters were heading in their direction. The objects moved away almost immediately afterward. But I do not know what the pilots knew, what the objects were, or whether the 2 events were actually connected. All I know is what I saw. I saw colors moving in organized patterns across the sky. I saw those colors form triangles. I saw the outline of large, dark objects hovering silently above us. I saw them bobbing and weaving without making a sound. I saw 3 military-looking helicopters fly low over the house toward them. And I saw the objects disappear at a speed that made normal flight seem impossible. Even now, more than a decade later, I get chills when I think about it. Sometimes I will be outside at night looking up at the stars, and I will remember how the sky looked before the helicopters arrived. I remember the colors moving together. I remember the strange silence. I remember watching the shapes turn slowly, as if they had all the time in the world. Then I remember the sound. Voom, 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 and I remember how quickly everything changed. I do not know if I believe in UFOs in the way people usually mean it. I do not know what was flying over our house that night. But I cannot honestly say that I believe it was nothing. 3 of us saw it. 3 of us remember it. And no matter how much time passes, I cannot turn it into a normal memory. Whatever those things were, they were in the sky above us. And then they were gone. My 2-year-old niece was there during the stay, and before any of this happened, I had never seen her truly scared of anything. She was fearless in the way only very small children can be. She had no real sense of danger yet. If someone had not been watching her, she probably would have toddled straight into the woods after a bear just because it looked interesting. She climbed on things, ran toward unfamiliar places, and wanted to investigate anything that caught her attention. She was not a cautious child. She was not shy around strangers. She was not the kind of kid who cried because a room was dark or because she heard a strange noise. At the time, she was also just learning to talk. She could say words clearly enough, but her sentences were short, usually only 1 or 2 words at a time. She could tell you what she wanted, point at things, name people, and make herself understood well enough when she was happy or upset. But she was still little. So when she became terrified, she did not have the words to explain why. We were staying somewhere as a family. I do not want to go into too much detail about the place itself, but it was a house large enough that everyone had rooms. There was an upstairs area, a long hallway, and at least 1 bunk room that was empty during much of our stay. For the first few days, everything seemed normal. The adults cooked meals, talked, and did whatever families do when they are all staying together. The children played, ran around, watched things, got dirty, argued, laughed, and wore themselves out. My niece was happy. She moved around the house without fear. She went from room to room, followed people around, and acted like she owned the place. Nothing seemed wrong. Then, about 3 or 4 days into the stay, something changed. It was around lunchtime. I was in the kitchen, helping out. There were people moving around, food being prepared, voices coming from nearby rooms. The usual busy feeling that happens when a family is trying to get a meal together. My niece wandered into the kitchen while I was helping. She was not upset when she came in. She looked normal. She was probably hungry, bored, or just checking where everyone was. I gave her a snack and a drink, made sure she was okay, and sent her back out to play. She could not have been gone for more than a minute. Then I heard her scream. It was one of the worst sounds I have ever heard from another person. It did not sound like a normal child crying because they fell down or got angry. It was not the sharp scream of a toddler who did not get what they wanted. It was not even the frightened scream a kid makes after a bad dream. It sounded like terror, the kind of scream that makes your body react before your mind understands why. It sounded almost animal, like something trapped and in pain, except it was clearly human. It was a high, desperate, blood-curdling sound that came from somewhere deeper than I had ever heard a child scream before. I dropped whatever I was doing and ran out of the kitchen. She was already running toward me down the hallway. Her face looked completely different. She was crying so hard that tears were streaming down her cheeks. Her mouth was open as she screamed, and she looked like she could barely breathe. She was not just upset. She was panicked in a way I had never seen from her. The second she reached me, she jumped into my arms. She grabbed at my neck and clothes, clinging to me hard enough that it hurt. Her whole body was shaking. She was trying to pull herself upward against me while also trying to make me move. Then she started shouting words. "Run, baby, eyes," then louder, over and over, "Eyes, run." She was screaming those words into my shoulder, pulling at me, clawing at my shirt, trying to make me leave with her. I remember standing there holding her, completely frozen. At first, I thought maybe one of the other children had scared her. Maybe somebody had jumped out from a room. Maybe she saw an animal, a bug, or something that startled her. Maybe she had gotten hurt and was too overwhelmed to explain it. But she kept pointing down the hallway. The hallway was empty. There were no windows there, no shadows moving from outside, no open door at the end, just a blank stretch of hallway with a locked door. She pointed toward it again, her arms shaking. "Eyes," she cried. Then she buried her face into me and started screaming again. By then, the rest of the family had heard the noise and came rushing over. People came out of the kitchen, from the living room, from nearby bedrooms. Everyone was asking what happened. Was she hurt? Did she fall? Did someone scare her? Was there something in the hall? I could not answer because I had no idea. I was holding a terrified 2-year-old who was pointing at an empty hallway and begging me to run. We checked the area. There was nothing there. The door at the end of the hallway was locked. There were no open windows. No one had been standing there. No cousin was hiding behind a corner. No animal had come inside. No strange object had fallen. Nothing. But that did not calm her down. Every time anyone tried to ask what had happened, she would say the same few things. "Baby, eyes, baby." Then she would break down crying again. At first, people tried to soothe her normally. They talked softly, rubbed her back, offered her water, gave her a toy, told her she was safe. But she would not settle. She kept looking over my shoulder toward the hallway as if she expected something to come after her. Eventually, after enough time passed and she was exhausted from crying, she calmed down a little. But she did not go back down that hall willingly. That was the first time. I wanted to believe it was a random scare. She was 2. Maybe she had seen her own reflection somewhere. Maybe a shadow had shifted. Maybe she had heard a noise in the wall and her imagination had taken over. Maybe she had seen something small, like a bug or a toy, and it had upset her more than we realized. I tried telling myself those things. But I had known her well enough to know that this was not her normal behavior. She had never been frightened like that before. And over the next few days, it happened again. The second time was upstairs. I was holding her, carrying her around with me. She was calm at first. She had recovered from the hallway incident enough that people had begun to treat it like one of those strange toddler moments that nobody could understand. We were upstairs near a couch. The upstairs area had a different feeling than the main floor. It was quieter, more closed off, and there were bedrooms nearby, including the bunk room. I remember walking with her in my arms, thinking I could sit down for a minute. I started lowering myself toward the couch. The second I did, she went rigid. Then she screamed. It was the same kind of scream. Sudden, horrified, full-body panic. She began clawing at me again, grabbing my shirt and neck. She pushed herself away from the couch as if it were burning. I stood back up immediately because I did not know what else to do. She pointed directly at the couch. "Run," she cried. Then she pointed down the hallway. Her little finger followed something I could not see. She tracked it, as though it was moving. She pointed away from the couch, down the hall, toward the empty bunk room. Her eyes followed it the entire time. "Baby," she said. Then she screamed again. There was nobody in the hallway. The bunk room was empty. I checked. I did not want to, but I checked anyway. The room looked normal. There were bunks, empty beds, the usual furniture, nothing out of place. No one was hiding there. No child was asleep under a blanket. No one had run into the room. Nothing moved. But my niece would not let me set her down. She kept clinging to me and looking toward the doorway. That was when I started feeling genuinely uneasy. It was not just that she was scared. Children can be scared of strange things. They can connect fear to a room, a sound, a shadow, or a place where they had a bad dream. But this was different because of the way she reacted. She did not only cry. She tried to make me run. She pointed at things that were not there. She followed something with her eyes. And every time she said the same words. "Baby eyes run" the third time happened when she was playing with her cousins. At that point, everyone was more alert around her, even if they did not admit it. The adults still did not know what to make of the first two incidents. Some probably thought she was overtired. Some might have believed one of the children scared her and would not admit it. Some likely thought she was reacting to something completely normal, but did not have enough language to explain it. But I was paying attention. I was the one who had been there each time. I knew that whatever frightened her, it did not seem connected to another child playing a prank. That day, she had been running around with her cousins, laughing and acting normal. She was happy. She was not near the hallway or the couch at first. She was doing what she always did, moving quickly from room to room and trying to keep up with the older kids. Then I heard her scream my name, not just a random cry, my name. It came from upstairs. I recognized the sound immediately. I ran toward it. The moment I heard her, I knew it was the same kind of fear as before. I found her in the empty bunk room. She was alone. The room was empty, except for her. She was crying so hard that she could barely stand. Her whole body shook. She looked at me as soon as I came through the door and ran toward me. I picked her up. She wrapped herself around me, sobbing into my shoulder. "Baby," she kept saying. "Baby eyes." Then she pointed toward one side of the room. I looked. There was nothing. I checked the beds. I looked under them. I looked into the corners. Nothing. The room was empty. But she refused to look toward the spot she had pointed at. She turned her face into my shoulder and held on so tightly that I could feel her trembling. After that, something changed in her behavior for the rest of the stay. She started trying to leave. Not in the normal toddler way where a child wants to go outside because they are bored. She wanted out of the house. She would head for doors, tug on handles, and become upset when she could not get through them. At one point, people had to make sure the doors stayed locked because she kept trying to escape. She was only 2. She did not understand the situation in an adult way. She could not explain where she wanted to go or why. She just wanted to leave. She did not want to be in that house anymore. Thankfully, we were close to the end of the stay. I do not know what would have happened if we had been there much longer. Maybe she would have adjusted. Maybe she would have stopped reacting after a few more days. Maybe she would have become more frightened. I do not know. But by that point, I was relieved we were leaving. The house had not seemed frightening before any of this began. I had not seen shadows, heard voices, or felt anything strange myself. The only thing that changed was my niece's behavior. But once someone that young reacts with that much terror, It is hard not to look at every quiet hallway differently. It is hard not to notice how empty rooms can feel. It is hard not to wonder what a child might be seeing when they point at a blank space and beg you to run. After we left, the fear did not disappear immediately. For a long time, you could not bring up the incident around her. Even months later, if someone mentioned it, she would become upset. She would cry, get anxious, and start talking about the ghost baby again. That was what she called it when she was old enough to say more. The ghost baby. At first, I do not think anyone wanted to hear that. Adults tend to look for ways to make a child's fear sound harmless. They will say a child had a bad dream, saw a shadow, copied something from television, or misunderstood a situation. And maybe that was true. Maybe she had seen a cousin sleeping upstairs. Maybe a blanket had moved. Maybe the shape under the blanket looked frightening to her. Maybe she did not understand that someone was lying in a bed and imagined a baby or eyes in the dark. Eventually, that became the family explanation. People decided she must have seen one of her cousins sleeping upstairs. Maybe the blanket shifted. Maybe she saw a face in the dark. Maybe the room had scared her and she created a story around it. Over time, it became a joke. People would laugh about how she once got scared by somebody sleeping under a blanket. They would talk about it like it was a funny childhood memory, something silly that happened when she was 2. But I was there. I was the only real witness for all 3 times. I was holding her during the second incident. I saw her point at the couch, then follow something down the hall with her finger. I saw her stare toward the bunk room as if something had moved there. I found her in the empty bunk room during the 3rd incident. There was no cousin sleeping under a blanket. There was no child playing a trick. There was no one in the room at all. And the first time, she ran from an empty hallway, screaming about eyes near a locked door. I am not saying I know what she saw. I do not. I cannot say there was definitely a ghost. I cannot say there was a baby in the house. I cannot say anything supernatural was there. There may have been a normal explanation that I did not understand. Children can react strongly to things adults miss. A sound, a shadow, a reflection, a smell, an unfamiliar room. Another child they saw only briefly. At 2 years old, she did not have the words to tell us exactly what frightened her. But I know it was not just a sleeping cousin. That explanation does not fit what I saw. The fear on her face was too real. The way she clung to me was too desperate. The way she kept trying to get away from the house did not feel like a child who had simply been startled by a moving blanket. And the words she repeated stayed with me. Run, baby, eyes, even now, I can remember the sound of her voice and the way she pointed down an empty hallway. There are things that might be easy to laugh about later because nobody wants to admit they do not understand them. That is what happened with this. The family found an explanation that made everyone comfortable, and eventually it became a joke. But I cannot joke about it, because I saw what fear looked like on a child who had never been afraid before. And whatever caused it, it was not another child. I had been dreaming about something, though I cannot remember what. It could have been a nightmare. It could have been a normal dream that turned strange right before I woke up. I only know that I opened my eyes suddenly in the middle of the night with a feeling that something was wrong. The room was completely dark, not the soft, familiar darkness you get when there is moonlight coming through a window or a hallway light shining under the door. This was pitch black. I could barely make out anything around me. I knew where I was because it was my room, and I knew my brother was nearby because he slept maybe 10 feet away from me. He was still a little kid then, only in the mid-single digits. I remember thinking about him almost immediately. I remember knowing he was close, asleep in the same room, while I lay there awake and afraid. When I first opened my eyes, I saw a figure standing over me. It looked human. At least it had the general outline of a person. A head, shoulders, arms, a body. But I could not make out details because of how dark the room was. The one thing I could see clearly was its eyes. They were red. Not the faint red reflection you sometimes see in a dark room when light hits someone's eyes at an angle. These looked brighter than the rest of the darkness around them. They were fixed on me, glowing, or at least appearing to glow, as the figure stared down at me from somewhere close to my bed. I froze. At first, I did not scream. I did not sit up. I did not call for my mom or my brother. I just stared. It felt like my body had decided before my mind could. Fear hit me so suddenly that I could not think of anything useful to do. I knew there was something standing there. I knew I could see red eyes in the dark, but I could not make myself move normally. Then I pulled the blanket over my head. That was all I could think to do. When you are a kid, a blanket can feel like protection. It does not matter that you know somewhere in the back of your mind that a blanket would not stop a person from touching you. It does not matter that it would not stop anything from coming closer. The blanket becomes a wall anyway. I pulled it over my head and held it tight around myself. For a moment, I stayed completely still. I listened. I do not remember hearing footsteps. I do not remember hearing breathing. I do not remember hearing the figure move. That almost made it worse. The room was silent. My brother was nearby, asleep, and I could not tell whether he had heard anything. I wanted to wake him up, but I was afraid to make a sound. I did not want to pull the blanket down. I did not want to look again. But eventually, I did. I peeked out. The figure was still there. But it was not the same figure. That was when my fear changed into something much harder to explain. The first figure had looked like a person standing over me. It had been dark and human-shaped, with red eyes glaring down, but when I looked out from under the blanket again, I saw a different human-like shape. It still had red eyes. It was still looking at me, but it was not the same. I could not understand how that was possible. For a second, I wondered whether I had imagined the first one. Maybe I had not really seen it. Maybe the darkness had made a shadow look different. Maybe my eyes were adjusting and changing the shape of things around me. But the red eyes were there again, and this figure was staring just as directly as the first one. I pulled the blanket over my head again. My heart was pounding so hard that I could feel it in my ears. I remember trying to convince myself that I was dreaming. I remember telling myself that I had to be asleep. I had to be having a nightmare. Nothing could really be standing in my room, changing shape whenever I looked at it. But I felt awake. That was the terrifying part. I was aware of the bed under me. I could feel the blanket around my face. I could hear the quiet room. I knew my brother was sleeping nearby. I knew I was supposed to be safe. It did not feel like a normal dream. After a few seconds, I peeked out again. There was another figure, still human-shaped, still standing somewhere close, still with red eyes, but different again. Each time I looked, it seemed like the thing had changed into someone or something else. I do not remember every shape clearly. A lot of it has blurred together over the years, but I remember the feeling that each one was different. It was like I was playing a terrible version of peekaboo with something that did not want to be seen. I would hide under the blanket. I would force myself to look, and there would be a new figure staring at me. No matter what it looked like, the eyes were always red. That was the part that stayed the same. The figures changed, but the eyes did not. They were always there in the darkness, watching me. I do not know how long this went on. At the time, it felt like forever. It could have been minutes. It could have been much less. It could have been longer than I remember. Fear changes time. A few seconds can feel like an hour when you are lying in a dark room, convinced something is standing beside your bed. I kept hiding under the blanket. I kept peeking out. And each time, I saw something new. One of the figures is the one I remember most clearly. It had something around its head that reminded me of Medusa. I do not know if it was actually hair. It may not have been hair at all. It looked like long shapes spreading out from its head, twisting or hanging in a way that made me think of snakes. Maybe it was just shadow. Maybe it was some strange shape my eyes created in the dark. But to me, it looked like Medusa-like hair. That figure was still human-shaped. It still had the red eyes. It was still staring down at me. I remember seeing it and feeling like I could not breathe. The idea that a different shape appeared every time I looked became too much. I stopped wanting to know what was there. I stopped wanting to peek out. I stopped wanting proof. I just wanted it to end. So I stayed hidden. I pulled the blanket over my entire body and held it as tightly as I could. I kept my face covered. I tried not to look toward the edge of the bed. I tried not to listen too closely. I tried not to imagine the figures standing there. I remember thinking that maybe if I did not look at them, they would go away. Maybe they only appeared when I looked. Maybe if I pretended I was asleep, they would leave me alone. I do not know how I managed it, but eventually I fell asleep again. Or at least, I think I did. The next thing I remember was my mom waking my brother and me up for school. It was morning. Light was coming into the room. The darkness was gone. Everything looked normal. My mom was there, telling us to get up. My brother was waking up nearby. The room was the same room it had always been. There were no figures standing near my bed. No red eyes, no strange shapes, no Medusa-like head. Nothing, just morning. It was around 7:30. That part confused me almost as much as the figures did. When I had been hiding under the blanket, the room had been completely black. It had felt like the middle of the night. But when my mom woke us up, it was suddenly morning, like only a second had passed. I had no memory of the time in between. I had no memory of hearing my mom get up. I had no memory of dawn arriving. I had no memory of falling asleep in a normal way. It felt like I had been terrified under the blanket, then instantly pulled into daylight. I remember lying there after my mom woke us, trying to decide whether to say something. I wanted to tell someone. I wanted to ask if my brother had seen anything. I wanted to ask if he had heard me moving, breathing hard, or pulling the blankets over my head. But I did not say anything. I do not know why. Maybe I was embarrassed. Maybe I thought everyone would tell me I had a bad dream. Maybe I was afraid that speaking about it would somehow make it real. Maybe I was scared that if I told my mom, she would look at the room and find nothing, and then I would have to accept that nobody believed me. So I kept it to myself. My brother was young enough that I did not know how to ask him about it without scaring him. He was only a few feet away from me while it happened, and he had slept through all of it, at least as far as I knew. That made the experience feel even stranger. There was something terrifying about the idea that these figures could be standing in the room while another person slept peacefully nearby. I wondered whether they had been looking at him too. I wondered whether they only wanted me to see them. I wondered whether they were even really there. For years afterward, the memory stayed with me. It was one of those childhood experiences that never faded the way most dreams fade. Usually, when you wake from a nightmare, you remember the feeling more than the details. You know you were scared, but after a few hours, the dream breaks apart. After a few days, it becomes hard to remember exactly what happened. This did not fade like that. I could still remember the red eyes. I could still remember hiding beneath the blanket. I could still remember the fear of peeking out again, knowing that something new might be standing there. I could still remember the figure with the strange Medusa-like shapes around its head. And I could still remember the impossible feeling of darkness turning into morning in what seemed like no time at all. For a long time, I did not tell anyone. Maybe I mentioned it years later. Maybe I only thought about it when I was alone at night. But I remember keeping it buried because I did not know how to explain it without sounding crazy. It was not like I could say I saw one person standing in my room. That would have been frightening enough. I saw several figures. Or at least I saw something that changed every time I looked. And they all had the same red eyes. Even now, I do not know what it was. Maybe it was a nightmare that blended into waking up. Maybe I was half asleep and my mind was creating shapes out of the darkness. Maybe every time I looked out from under the blanket, my eyes adjusted differently and made shadows seem like new figures. Maybe I was dreaming while believing I was awake. That is possible. But it felt real at the time. The fear was real. The room felt real. The blanket felt real. My brother sleeping nearby felt real. And the memories stayed with me for years in a way that most dreams never do. I do not know what was standing over me that night. I do not know why it kept changing. I do not know whether the red eyes were actually there or whether they were something my mind created in the dark. But I know I was terrified. And I know that after that night, I never looked at a dark room the same way again. If you've stayed with me this far, then these stories didn't simply pass the time. They stayed with you. Everything you heard tonight was real. Real people. Real moments. And in each one, something quietly slipped out of place. If you'd like more of the kind that don't let go so easily, subscribe to Crowvane Manor. There are more rooms left open and more stories waiting behind every door. I'm grateful you spent this part of your night here. Rest well, and I'll be waiting when you return.